Show. On today's programme, is it time for MSPs to back the idea of assisted dying in Scotland? Last week's fire that caused the collapse of an iconic 19th century building near Glasgow Central Station raises a number of questions, not least do we adequately protect our built heritage? And the latest published documents in the Mandelson affair, do they show that the Prime Minister is cavalier in ignoring advice, or is it more simple? He has no judgment. We discuss. That's all ahead in the next hour in the company of my guests, who today are the former athlete Brian Whittle, who entered politics and has been an MSP for the Scottish Conservatives since 2016, representing the South of Scotland region at Holyrood. From Scottish Labour, we have Katherine Sangster, who's the National Director of the Scottish Fabians and the party's candidate in Edinburgh Eastern, Musselburgh and Tranent. Brian Monteith describes himself as an impish iconoclast who has swum against the tide in both Holyrood and European parliaments. He currently supports Reform UK Scotland. And for the SNP, Rona MacKay is the member of the Scottish Parliament for Strathkelvin and Bearsden, a seat that Rona has represented at Holyrood for the last 10 years. Well, MSPs are working overtime at the moment, considering the Members' Bill on assisted dying being piloted by the Scottish Liberal Democrat Liam MacArthur. Previous attempts at changing the law on this issue failed pretty comprehensively, but this time the final vote on the proposals looks to be too close to call. Some of the debates on the legislation have seen some of the most moving speeches in the history of the Scottish Parliament. MSPs have a free vote on the issue, meaning there is no party line to follow. Rather, they vote as their conscience tells them. So my first question today is a simple one. Time to change the law on assisted dying. Brian Whittle.
I think we're closer to it, the changing the law, than we've been before. And there's been two previous attempts to change the law. I would say at the outset here, I think that this particular term in Parliament has not been particularly good. I think it's been quite poor up until this particular bill. I think the way in which the Parliament has conducted itself, the way in which MSPs have conducted themselves, as you say, some really moving speeches when they're unshackled by the whip. It has been, I've been front and centre of this for our party. It has been, one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. 26 hours of stage 3. I was involved in stage 2 and stage 1. And I think we're quite close. It is too close to call. I spoke to Liam MacArthur yesterday because I'm one of the ones that I voted for the principle of the bill. I'm not opposed to the bill for any, ideological ways. My gut is to say that people should have choice. But what we have to decide is whether or not this is the bill that allows that choice with the best protection we possibly can. And what it has highlighted is palliative care, social care, the gaps in palliative care and social care. I don't think we can have this bill without those gaps being filled. And also the big issue a lot of people have been talking about is around coercion.
Yeah, let's come back to some of the issues in a moment, but I should bring in Rona at this stage because obviously Rona's a parliamentarian who has to consider these issues as well. Rona, of course, this is not the first time that this principle has come before the Parliament. There's been at least, I think, another couple of attempts. I think the first attempt, it didn't even get off the ground. Such was opinion when the late Margot MacDonald piloted it. Where is your sense of where parliamentarians are with this issue at the moment?
Brian, I think it's going to be very, very close. There's no doubt about that. For myself, I'm a passionate supporter of this bill going through. I've been the convener of the End of Life Choices cross-party group for several years. It's a momentous piece of legislation. I think it's long overdue. It will be the most heavily safeguarded bill of any jurisdiction with assisted dying. If this passes, a record number of amendments and safeguards have been put into it. Every detail, every nuance has been considered. And I think, it really is up to the conscience of parliamentarians as to whether they pass it on Tuesday or not. I believe, and Brian will have met with terminally ill people who are begging us to pass this bill because it gives them the choice to end their lives with dignity, which they don't have just now. And the status quo is absolutely not acceptable. So I mean, I could say a lot more about it, but I know other people want to speak, but I am very passionate about this bill.
Brian, very often, sometimes I can think of issues like hanging, homosexual law reform, where there are attempts and attempts and attempts to change the law, and eventually there is reform. Does this feel that one such issue, that even if this is not to pass this time, it is only a matter of time before it does?
I think it seems very much like that, and it does seem that were it to fail, then it would be likely that at some stage in the next period of the Parliament it might come back again, and that there, in that manner, be further attempts to give reassurance. Because in no sense of what one might frame as progressive liberal changes to social law, that's the process that appears to happen. That these don't always get over the line, but then people build up momentum, and a new group, a new majority forms after elections. And who's to know if that would change following the elections later this year. So I think that what happens is there's a skepticism, and that's kind of where I fall. I'm not a passionate believer in either side. I look at the evidence. I would listen to the speeches where I'm in Parliament and facing the votes, and try to weigh up the evidence. But I would be a natural skeptic in this type of consideration, generally because it puts power in the hands of people that we have to have trust and reassurances. And when such measures involve the state, I naturally recoil, being more of a liberal bent than trustworthy of the state.
Katherine, this is one of these issues where members of Parliament will be lobbied from both sides, and one of the things that has struck me is that I listen to one side of the argument and I think I'm persuaded by that, and then I listen to the other side and I'm now not sure. But of course, as a legislator, you're torn with these kind of things, and at the end of the day, you have to make a decision. If you are elected, and you probably will, given where you are on the list, on Lothians, you're going to have to wrestle with some of these issues. Has its time come?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually, I feel very positive listening to the parliamentarians here, because I do feel like we're moving towards a consensus. And I think it's really important when you're doing any kind of legislation like this, which is, as you say, is about society and progressing, that we actually take the country with us. My concern over certain things that have been done in the Scottish Parliament recently is that we've not. There's been a real polarisation of that debate. And I do not want assisted dying to become one of those issues. So I'm very cheered by what I've heard today. My journey is a bit like yours. Instinctively, I support assisted dying. I always have, and that's come from my own experience of watching loved ones die and being there at the end of their lives. I've also volunteered for a hospice, so I believe really passionately in end-of-life care and actually discussion in a society about how we have a good death. However, I am persuaded by the disability groups that have been lobbying us. I'm concerned that the Royal College of Psychiatrists and Pharmacists have withdrawn support for this bill. And I would always say, good intent doesn't make good policy. I'm a bit concerned about 175 amendments at this stage and being rushed through. So yeah, I mean, I think we just always have to be careful about unintended consequences and make sure that there's the safeguardings in place, that vulnerable people won't be pushed into doing anything that they don't want to do, and also that the funding for end-of-life care and palliative care isn't pushed aside.
Yeah.
That's really important. I'm cheered by Daniel Johnson's amendment that it's 6 months to live. So my heart is telling me that this is the right thing to do, but my head really needs to see the safeguards there before I would vote for it.
I mean, the issue here of parliamentary scrutiny is an important one, to make sure that all arguments are tested, to make sure that judgments are properly evidence-based. Looking in, Brian, it does look as if there is an awful lot of amendments and debate which seems to have come late in the day, and these long sessions, perhaps because you're having to get through this before the end of a parliamentary term. Are you not concerned that you're not taking enough time with this?
Dear, I was stage 2 took a long time as well. There was a lot of amendments at stage 2, and actually quite a lot of the amendments at stage 3 were narrowly defeated at stage 2 because they weren't quite ready. So I came back at stage 3 in a much better condition. I'm buoyed by that. But to your point, I think that I've been involved in it because I'm in the Health and Sport Committee, so I've been immersed in it from the get-go. Quite a few MSPs, because they've other things to do, have come to it quite late. And my concern was that some of the amendments that came to at stage 3, I thought had very good intent, but not quite drafted properly, so couldn't pass. And I'm thinking, God, if you brought them forward at stage 2, we could have changed them to fit the bill for stage 3. So I think, I'm very much in the same boat, is that, instinctively I think we should have choice. But I'm poring over the amendments at the moment. I did say to Liam MacArthur that exactly this, that it would have to be amended significantly before I could, vote for it at stage 3. And it has been amended quite a lot, but quite a lot of the bits haven't been. I mean, the pharmacy stuff, they were my amendments that I brought forward. And to consider that pharmacists are now not considered in the bill as being healthcare professionals that can deliver the drug that they're trained to do.
Yeah.
I couldn't quite get my head around why that didn't pass. So there's a few things we have to consider before, and at the end of the day, it's going to be down to our individual conscience.
Okay, let me go back to Rona just at this stage. I mean, everybody's saying it's important that it's evidence-based. Now, in your first contribution, Rona, you said that you were a passionate supporter of this principle. What is the evidence that you have looked at that persuades you that now is the time for this reform?
Well, I mean, apart from it basically being in my opinion, the sort of compassionate way to go, I mean, the evidence, if you want to start comparing, and rightly so, looking at any impact it might have on palliative care and hospices, there was a House of Commons 14-month inquiry that found no evidence of palliative or end-of-life care being deteriorating, following assisted dying in other jurisdictions. And in fact, the evidence was that it often had acted as a catalyst for improvement of palliative care. So it's not an either or, they work together. And that's what the whole thing about the choice is. It's giving people that extra choice where palliative care may fail them, or they just want the choice to have a death of their choosing. So consistent international evidence, and don't forget, this is not, we're not leaping into the dark, because other countries do this and they do it successfully. There have not been issues. So we have drawn a lot on international evidence, and that's what we're going on. It is the most heavily safeguarded bill in any of those jurisdictions at the moment. 300 and I think it was 340 amendments, a lot of which were passed, very detailed. So I think it's also the most heavily scrutinised piece of legislation that we've put through time-wise. I mean, we've been, as Brian said, I wasn't involved at stage 2 because I'm not in the health committee, but stage 3 alone, we've been working on it from Tuesday till Friday. So that hasn't happened before. So we're not rushing it. It's because we realise the sensitivities of it, and every possibility has been explored. And Liam MacArthur, to his credit, has been incredibly respectful. I think it has been a respectful debate, and I understand people who don't. Well, no, I don't understand. I respect people who don't agree with it, but I don't like misinformation being put out, and there has been a lot of that as well. So I think, I think it's just up to people to look at the evidence and to come to conclusion that it's the right thing to do.
Brian, just at this stage, I mean, how would you characterise your position? Are you minded but not utterly certain?
I flip-flop, to be quite honest. And the only thing I promised Liam MacArthur would do is not abstain. I think it's far too important about legislation to not take a position. I think some of it's quite interesting. Listen to Rona. Rona was very strong in the Stage 3 amendments, and how you look at the evidence depends on which side of the fence you're on. And I'm in the middle, if you like. And we took evidence in the Health and Sport Committee from around the world. And I was very struck by, we took evidence from Canada, and we had two diametrically opposite positions. And in the end, that evidence session we had to bin, because we got nothing from it, because one expert said one thing, one expert said exactly the opposite. And I think the thing about, Rona's correct, and I said this to her the other day in passing, that in some of the jurisdictions, palliative care has got better. But got better's not enough. It has to be consistent, and it has to be available to everybody who wants to access, who would want to access assisted dying. It can't be either or, it has to be both, because your choice can't be or assisted dying. It has to be palliative care, social care, or assisted dying, and or treatment. All of that has to be available consistently.
Brian, what about the palliative care point?
Well, I think looking at how people approach it, I would want to consider dispassionate evidence rather than passionate evidence. I can see why people take particular positions because of experience, and most people in their lives will go through an experience of losing a loved one, some being very close to it when it happens. And many of us, and I was in Parliament for 8 years, and I visited a number of palliative care scenes, and they're very moving, and they actually help you come to a conclusion that more must be done in that area. And so much of it's done through charitable work rather than actually the NHS. So it's been an area that's been desperate to be treated seriously by the NHS for a very long time. And looking at that dispassionately, you'd first of all want to make sure that that's already happening, and it's happening in an even way, as Brian Whittle explains. So I think that has to be done, whatever the result of this bill. But I can see how an unintended consequence could be that the bill actually might help that. And that's me being dispassionate about it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the unintended consequence can be good or bad, and that could be one of them.
Katherine, do you want to respond to what you've heard?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all in the same place about making sure that palliative care is funded properly and that end-of-life care is funded properly. I mean, I would say that one of my other concerns is the removal of the no detriment clauses, and I don't know if the parliamentarians could speak to that, because that also intersects with what's happening in the UK Parliament. So I would worry about that.
I just made one final point, both to Brian and Rona, since they actually have a vote on this, and perhaps be brief in your answers. Is your hunch that this will pass or this will fall? Brian, let's start with you.
I think by 2 or 3 votes it'll fall.
Rona?
I think by 2 or 3 votes it'll pass. I'm an optimist.
Well, we've had a discussion which has been very, very balanced. So that's one prediction that this is going to fall by 2 or 3 votes, and one prediction that it's going to pass by 2 or 3 votes. I, for one, would not like to have to take this decision and vote, because I can see arguments one way or the other. But just to repeat a point I made in the intro, some of the speeches that have been made in Parliament have been of the very, very highest order. It's been a magnificent advert for not having a whipping system and allowing elected representatives to actually say what they think. That's part one of the show. We'll be back after this shot. commercial break.
This is the Go Radio Politics Show with Bernard Ponsonby.
And welcome back. The fire that broke out in Union Street in Glasgow a week ago and which eventually destroyed an iconic building has forever changed the city's vista, plunged small businesses into chaos and dealt yet another body blow to Glasgow's architectural heritage. I always tell visitors to the city that when they're on a walk they should look up, for that's where the magic is to be found. No more, however, on the corner of Union Street and Gordon Street. It's thought the fire started in a vape shop. They are largely unregulated. Apparently the inspection powers of the council are limited. Glaswegians wait to see what will emerge from the ashes. What is probably unlikely is that the grandeur that went before will be repeated. So my first question in this section of the show, do we do enough to protect our architectural heritage? Katherine?
Well, I mean, clearly we don't. Because of the tragedy that happened. I mean, you know, firstly, immensely grateful to the firefighters who rushed to the scene, and my heart goes out to all the small businesses that lost their livelihoods. I actually sat online last night and looked at the GoFundMe, and it was, you know, really fantastic the way people have rallied round, and tens of thousands of pounds have already been raised to help these small businesses, but that's fantastic. I mean, I think it should be a wake-up call to the SNP, looking at the cuts that they're putting into fire stations and units. I think we have to relook at that. It may be that, you know, one of the justifications for the cuts is that there's less home fires. Actually, what we're looking at is what's happened here is that, you know, more danger to our historic buildings and the risk of vape shops. And I mean, since 2013, we've seen, you know, 1,200 firefighter jobs cut. So I think that needs to be looked at. In terms of, you know, I'm a candidate at the moment. I'm outdoor knocking all the time. And one of the things that people raise with me is the decline of the high street, and they're feeling that the public realm is declining around them. So to answer your question on more powers, I think absolutely the council should have more powers. You know, these shops, a huge concern, fire risk, which I think many of us probably didn't realise. We weren't aware of that. But certainly people raise with me, you know, the risk of it being organised crime or, you know, selling to children. In England, we have given councils more powers to regulate vape shops, betting shops, and actually be able to put planning in to get a better retail mix. We've also put 50 billion into Pride and Place funding, which helps the high street. So I think there's a range of measures that we can do to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Brian, in this city, and I know you're not a Glaswegian, but in this city, 2 fires at the art school. We have the People's Palace, which is a very, very important building in Glasgow. We have the Winter Gardens, which are closed. We have the Dalton Fountain right outside it, which seems to be in a state of disrepair. Our architectural heritage is not just to be enjoyed by people who live here. It's absolutely central in leaving tourists with a positive image of a city. Does politics in general take the idea of the built environment seriously?
I doubt it. I don't think so. Glasgow's an architectural gem in the United Kingdom. There's no question about that, and I say that as someone from Edinburgh. It's a marvel to arrive in Glasgow and walk around it, and as you say, to look up. I think people think of architectural gems as essentially being stately homes and old churches that need preserved. It goes much deeper than that. For instance, the Bernard Klein studio in the Borders, which went to ruin, has yet again just been saved. It's not the sort of building that people immediately think of as needing saved, but it's a modern building, and modern buildings need saved too for their architectural uniqueness. What I would question is, what does more powers mean? What is the fire hazard of a bookies compared to the fire hazard of a vape shop? The regulations that we're seeing coming in, the more powers we're talking about, are about betting. They're about vaping. What we need to treat seriously is the fire threat of the batteries. And I think that's the issue at the heart, we suspect anyway, with this particular incident. Whether or not a shop should be able to open without a fire certificate when it is actually a hazard and located in an architectural gem itself.
Brian?
Well, I don't think it's not so much about more powers. You can give the local council as much powers as you like, but if you don't have the people to deliver and you don't have the finance to deliver those powers, it's toothless. And the whole vaping thing surprises me hugely. As 1,000 years ago, I had a degree in chemistry, so I think of lithium and lithium batteries, which are in of themselves a fire hazard. Don't start me on the health impact of vaping at the moment, but without a fire certificate, a shop full of lithium batteries, if something happens within that shop that a fire spreads to across those lithium batteries, well, we saw what happened. It sounded like firecrackers going off. So it's all very well saying they need more powers, but if we keep stripping out funding to our councils, as has happened consistently over the last few while, when we know how far Glasgow has fallen in the last decade, it's sad to see. If we keep stripping out the funding of it, it doesn't matter how many powers you give them. If they can't actually deploy those powers, it's toothless.
Rona, what do you think the lessons of this fire are? Because it has at last actually provoked a debate about what we do with some of our architectural gems, and obviously the government have stepped in with cash in terms of the redevelopment of the site. So in a sense, it's a wake-up call, but what's the key lesson that we have to learn from this?
Well, I think you're right. It's heartbreaking. I'm a proud Glaswegian, and I just thought it was, like most people, it was heartbreaking to see that happen. You take these things for granted when you're born and brought up in a city, and you're right. You need to look up and appreciate what's there. I don't think we have looked after our heritage buildings enough. The First Minister has announced £10 million to go in for to help businesses and to redevelop, which is obviously good news. And I think the lessons if anything good can come out of this, the lesson would be that, we need to look at these things and not take them for granted and protect them much more. I agree with some of the points that people have made. I don't agree, incidentally. I think it's irresponsible to suggest that it's, anything to do with fire service cuts. The Assistant Chief Officer has strongly refuted that and said they have all the necessary resources to do the terrific job that they did. I don't think anyone would dispute how well they did in, trying to contain that fire. But I think lessons have been learned. The spotlight's been been shone on what we need to do in terms of protecting our buildings. The vape shop question is obviously, come to the surface. Of course, they should be regulated. There should be tighter restrictions on them. And it's just one of these horrible incidents that no one could have foreseen. But perhaps now we will look at our lovely architecture and think, yeah, we do need to protect it.
Katherine, has the government's response been an appropriate one? I mean, the First Minister has committed, I think, up to £1 million for clearing the site, and up to £10 million package in order to help businesses. So the Scottish Government have not said, well, this is on Glasgow City Council. They've actually stepped up to the plate. The question is it enough?
Yeah. I mean, I think in the first instance they have, but I think to Brian's point as well, we have seen a hollowing out of funding of local government, and if we want to put more powers to the council to regulate these shops, or as you say, to look after our beautiful old buildings, then I think there has to be a sustained look at how we're funding our councils going forward.
Brian, isn't there a need for an audit to be done in all of these buildings? Because some of the issues here are that the ownership of them is, they're in private hands. Some of them will probably be owned by investment companies. Some people will abandon these buildings. There really is a need to do an audit in order that somebody actually knows what the state of play is with every architectural gem. It does seem to me that there's a sort of hands-off approach, and these things only come into focus when something goes wrong.
Well, an audit is available. There's buildings at risk audit kept, and it's generally available, and it's reviewed as some buildings sadly leave us because they become so decrepit they collapse. The question, I think, is more as to what can be done with the audit. That's clearly a voluntary system at the moment, in the sense of producing the audit by people who love these buildings. But what would then happen? Would we then, as a country, want to see scarce resources? Let's face it, there's no money. One might say to Shona Robertson, how can we help those buildings that are at risk? Is it the ownership that's the problem? I'm not convinced that if, say, the state owned these buildings at risk, suddenly that would mean there'd be buildings being revived. When the state has to take on the healthcare, the schooling, the police, the transport, all these other issues. That's why eventually the buildings fall down in the sense of priority. So we'd need to think through not just having a more regular audit possibly, but actually what we would do with it.
Yeah. Brian Whittle, isn't Brian Monteith right in a sense that you can say this is what we should be doing in relation to this, but at some point, some minister or some council leader is going to have to take a decision about allocating resources, and when you are under pressure about having more money for health, more money for education, more money for transport, the built environment is going to be way down the list politically. That's just the reality.
But I think if I was going to put a point to this, I would say that the problem that a lot of these portfolios suffer from is the fact we have 5-year cycles, and nobody thinks outside of that 5-year cycle. I'm thinking in terms of one of the things we could be doing is we need to be able to hold absentee landlords to account much more than we currently do. I'm thinking of the Air Station Hotel, and the millions that has cost while we try and get the absentee landlord to do something about it. Exactly the same. I mean, the thing about the Glasgow one, I mean, that is prime site property. So in terms of what the government have done to date, I'm not going to fault that. I think they have stepped in. Credit where credit's due, and I think somebody will come in and some developer will come in and develop that not to the standard it was before, because they don't build buildings like that anymore. But we have to look at the planning situation. We have to look at how we hold absentee landlords to account. We have to hold landlords who are here to account to a much higher standard. But to your point about finance, I think a lot of these things are a false economy, and the whole system seems to be, we're managing the decline, if you like, rather than considering how we maintain that level. Because if we can make Glasgow city centre and Edinburgh city, Edinburgh Princes Street is starting to struggle as well.
Yeah.
But if we allow those to decline, what means is we don't get as many tourists, we don't get much money through the door. It's a false economy. So we need to look at things in the round rather than just individually.
Rona, one of the things I've been quite impressed by is the number of just ordinary citizens who have been going to the site, who've been providing vox pops for broadcasters and for journalists. And what is absolutely clear is that people in this city absolutely care about these buildings. I've been impressed by just how articulate and passionate people are about the architecture of their own city. Now, because this is such an iconic site, would it make sense for the council to compulsorily purchase that bit of land? Because I think Glaswegians now feel that they have a vested interest in something going up which is appropriate and reflects the city, and a compulsory purchase by the council of the land would at least get the ball rolling on that.
Well, yeah, I agree 100% with you on all those points, Bernard. If the council could do that, I think that would be ideal, because you're right. Ordinary people do have a strong connection with these buildings and the architecture. But I think also your point about the ownership of buildings is really important, because you can go to any city or even town. I'm in Kirkintilloch, and there are whole parts of streets owned by companies, investment companies, and how do you get them to be responsible for the upkeep of any building? So I think the ownership question is really, really important. And of course, when you go to any European city, the thing that strikes you is, they're beautifully preserved buildings, and you look at it and say, they've maintained them, the upkeep's there, and in many cases a lot of our buildings, even in Glasgow, all over, have over the decades just been bulldozed rather than being restored. And I think as I say, if anything good has come of this, it will put a focus on how we do actually treat our lovely irreplaceable buildings. And we just have to see how it goes from here. But yeah, I think there's a lot of things to be looked at, because it's too important. It's too important for future generations just to lose them.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask my two guests from Edinburgh a question, because I was so depressed about the state of Glasgow city centre. When I have visitors who come to the city, I always do the tour of Edinburgh, incidentally, as well, because it's a magnificent city. But I was avoiding taking them to Sucky Hall Street because I was so embarrassed by it, and the fact that it was tired, it was run down, there were all these to let signs. And when I walk Princes Street now, I think I can see it going the same way. This is absolutely key in the sense that people who come here, who spend their money, and you want them to come back and to support businesses, hotels, restaurants, etc., they won't if they feel I'm in a place which is down at heel. Why is Edinburgh get into that state?
I think actually in both Glasgow and Edinburgh, we have politicians that run councils that drive business out of the city centres. They hollow it out for people to live in the city centres. They hate people taking the car into city centres. And then we wonder why they end up actually going into disrepair, because they're not actually functioning as city centres. They become scruffy. They're never repaired in the areas that councils have responsibility for, such as the potholes. But money can be found for cycle lanes when pavements are broken. So I think it's just not treated seriously. We can look at issues such as the Royal High School building, which was meant to be the Parliament. It's still not being used fully and taken care of, and there have been many plans. So the ownership, is it not actually publicly owned through Network Rail? I'm not convinced it's about actually having the passion to deal with it and to raise the priority and make it easier to do business and to live in our city centres.
Yeah, I mean, some people, I do say, I just cannot understand why potholes can't be repaired, graffiti can't be removed. I think the leader of Glasgow City Council told me in an interview several years ago that the only thing that was wrong with Glasgow is that it needed a wee spruce up. Well, I still walk around and I'm still waiting for the wee spruce up, but it looks as if bits of Edinburgh need a wee spruce up as well.
They absolutely do. And again, on the doorstep, that potholes and again, the decline in our streets is always raised. I mean, Scottish Labour announced this week 350 million for potholes repurposed from the active travel budget, because if you want to cycle on roads, they can't have potholes either. So it's not, it's not one or the other. I mean, I've had to think quite a lot in my own constituency that I'm standing. We have a public building crisis. In Portobello, we've actually done really well in terms of community buyout with the Belfield, and they've just bought the police station, I believe. So that needs engaged communities, it needs funding. But in Musselburgh, we have, the Brunton Theatre is closed, the community centre is closed, the town hall sits closed. So it needs, and I don't actually think it's a particularly party political point, to be honest. I think it just needs sustained focus and funding in our communities to make sure that, as you say, these well-loved buildings are used.
Well, that's part two of the show. We haven't been deeply party political at all this morning. It's all been, consensus, really, I think, across the first two issues. I've got a feeling that will probably depart when, in part three, I ask, does Keir Starmer have any judgment at all? That's after this short commercial break.
This is the Go Radio Politics Show with Bernard Ponsonby.
And welcome back. This week we got the first tranche of paperwork linked to the appointment of Lord Mandelson as the British ambassador to the United States. It came as another photograph emerged of Mandelson in the company of the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein and the disgraced Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. We learn that the Prime Minister was warned repeatedly that appointing Mandelson was a bad idea and involved the potential for reputational risk for the government and the Prime Minister himself. Rarely can the views of advisers and mandarins have been demonstrated to be quite so prescient. Sir Keir ignored them all and is now left to carry the can for the folly of his own actions. So, my first question today, did we learn anything new this week? Rona MacKay.
I don't actually think we did. I personally think it's an insult to our intelligence to suggest that Keir Starmer was not aware of Peter Mandelson's murky past before he appointed him, and I think that's becoming clear. I think most people actually think that. I think Keir Starmer has a history of poor judgment. I think his U-turns in other policy areas have been, astonishing. And I think that Anas Sarwar, who's been very silent actually about this, he's got some questions to answer about his, quote, old friend, Peter Mandelson, with whom he's pictured on numerous occasions. He's been very silent on this. So I think it was a huge, huge error of judgment, and that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are entirely at fault here.
Brian Monteith, we sort of knew before all of this was published this week that the Prime Minister had appointed Peter Mandelson in the full knowledge that Peter Mandelson was still having a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after Epstein, had been convicted. Now, we knew that much, but what I suppose we did learn this week was that there were quite a lot of people waving quite a lot of red flags, saying, no Prime Minister, and yet he ignored them.
Well, let me give a comparison. There was a great deal of coverage about the former Prince Andrew Windsor Mountbatten, and clamour. There was a clamour that he should lose his royal titles, that he should be kicked out of the house he was staying in, that he should be dissociated with. But Mandelson, we knew similar evidence in the sense of having a relationship after the conviction, but he was fit. He was fit and proper to become the ambassador, the most important appointment to Washington of all the ambassador that need to be made. And now we know, yes, and we knew much of this, that he'd been warned. Now we know the scale of the warnings the Prime Minister was given. But what we didn't know was that the Prime Minister never took the trouble to speak to Peter Mandelson. He never picked up the phone. He never actually had a meeting with him. The most important diplomatic appointment, and he couldn't be bothered, shall I say. I can't believe that. It just shows not just poor judgment in the sense of the appointment, but poor conduct in the sense of how to make the appointment. He needed to look Mandelson in the eye and say, this is what I know, can you give me assurances? And he didn't do it.
Katherine, was Peter Mandelson ever a fit and proper person to be a British ambassador?
Well, it's clear that now that he wasn't. And I mean, what we learned this week was that when the Prime Minister did understand the depth of his relationship with Epstein, then he was removed from his post. And not only that,
but the Prime Minister did actually know that at the point of appointment, and I think this is the key point here, he knew. Without asking Mandelson, because as Brian Monteith has just said, he didn't even have a conversation with him, which I find extraordinary. The Prime Minister knew that Peter Mandelson was continuing to see Jeffrey Epstein after he had a criminal conviction. Now, surely that fact alone should have disbarred Peter Mandelson from being appointed. It's an extraordinary decision for any Prime Minister to take.
And he's apologised for that decision. So he's apologised for appointing Mandelson. He's apologised to the victims of Epstein. Now, I mean, one of my frustrations in all of this is that, Jess Phillips stood up in Parliament this week, it was International Women's Day, and she read out the names of 107 women killed by men this year. She gets special dispensation from the Leader of the House of Commons because it takes so long. Now, the Prime Minister has apologised. It was obviously an error of judgment. No one's saying it wasn't. But I'm very concerned that the voice of the victims is lost in this. And I would push the American government, because I would actually like to see some convictions on this. Because the only person who is in jail is Maxwell, and obviously Epstein has died. So I would really like to hear more voices of the victims.
This may well, of course, come out because there's pressure for more documents to be released in the United States. But, Brian, I think that Keir Starmer is on U-turn number 15, which does rather indicate that they're not great in the political management stakes if you're having to U-turn on policy 15 times. And here is something which goes to the heart of the government. From your point of view, it's he's quite useful for the Tories, is he not? Keep him there should be your line.
I was actually going to say that. I mean, I think generally for anybody looking in, whether you're political or not, it is quite astonishing how poor the judgment has been of the Labour Party from the get-go. So from the get-go they went, I know what we'll do, we'll punish the elderly, we'll punish our food producers and farmers, and we'll punish business. And from a Labour Party, I think that's an astonishing line to take. And you've got to remember, Keir Starmer's a lawyer. You would think that he would be forensic in this kind of in his approach to this kind of thing, and he's just been shown, as you say, he didn't even have a conversation with Mandelson, even given he was pre-warned that this could damage their reputation. I find it absolutely astonishing. I mean, from a personal point of view, from a political point of view, we want Starmer to stay, but from a country point of view, it has to change. It has to change. I mean, when you have the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland, Anas Sarwar, trying to jump off the sinking ship, something is very awry here.
Rona, obviously we're just about to get into the Scottish election campaign. Quite a lot of people within the Labour Party tell me that the Prime Minister goes down like a lead balloon on the doorstep. Is Keir Starmer, in a sense, one of the SNP's secret weapon in the election?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that that he is incredibly unpopular. I mean, we're fighting this election on positive policies. I mean, we're fighting this election on what we can bring to the country and the benefits of independence, and that's going down well. I mean, the polls are showing us way ahead. I don't think we need help from Keir Starmer's incompetence, to win this election, but there's no doubt, that it certainly doesn't do us any harm as he moves from one blunder to the next.
Katherine, Anas Sarwar has no confidence in the Prime Minister. Do you?
I think Anas was right to say what he had said about Starmer. We have to get the Scottish parliamentary elections onto the issues that are important.
So the Prime Minister should go?
I do not think the Prime Minister should go at the moment, because we are in the middle.
So when should he go?
Well, we're in the middle of a global crisis. And when I've been outdoor knocking this weekend...
So he should go, it's just a matter of timing, in your view?
I don't think we should churn through Prime Ministers at this stage.
But Anas Sarwar wants him gone.
Anas Sarwar was right to distance himself
and
from...
you support Anas Sarwar?
And I do support
So
Anas.
you support the Prime Minister going?
I support what Anas said at that point. What I would say is...
I'm not sure what you think.
Well, I think we've moved... My point is, I think we've moved on slightly, because at the moment, our Prime Minister is dealing with a global crisis. So I'm not going to call for the Prime Minister to go at this point.
Brian Monteith.
The reality is that everyone in the Labour Party is waiting on the May elections. And once those are out the road, be it in Wales, Scotland, or the English councils, they will then come for Keir Starmer. The difficulty that many people have is what replaces him, maybe even worse. Talk about bad judgment from Keir Starmer, who doesn't even actually make judgments. He delegates judgments. Then we really are going to see some Labour policies people will find uncomfortable if he goes.
Do you think the Prime Minister's a dead man walking, Brian?
I think he is. I mean, and I think anybody looking in can see that. I think, if it's anybody going to learn any lessons at all, I think, swift changes of leader doesn't necessarily help very much, and it doesn't, and more importantly, it doesn't help the country. And we're in the middle of a global crisis at the moment. But I don't think he's handling that well either when we look at that as well. So I think he is a dead man walking. I think, to Brian's point, I think the May elections coming round are going to probably put the final nail in the coffin. The problem you've got is what follows him, and there's nothing there you would say that would say is leadership quality. And I have to say, like Rona saying that they're on positive policies, that's what we're trying to do as well. We're not talking about Labour on the door at all. We're just letting Labour deal with themselves because they seem to be on a slide that's never ending. And we're just going to keep talking about, the positive policies of the Scottish Conservatives.
There is, I think, among the commentators, Katherine, a consensus that the SNP will emerge, certainly as the largest party at the end of the election campaign. And the interesting question is who is going to come second? Will it be Labour or will it be Reform UK? Let me put it to you that the reason Brian Monteith, I know that Brian Whittle's saying that the Tories are going to come second. I'll eat my hat. I'll eat my hat if the Tories come second.
I will come in with a knife and fork for you.
Right. I'll eat the hat, honestly. But the mere fact that Reform UK are where they are, that there is a gap in the market, surely is down to the stewardship of the UK government and the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has in part been a recruiting sergeant for Reform UK.
Well, I think people are desperate for change, and we would say that we have not delivered that fast enough, and we get it, and we need to put more money in people's pockets as quickly as possible. Labour is the only alternative to the SNP in Scotland. Reform may be polling well, but we are in second place in the last polls that came out. And I would put a challenge to Reform that they haven't even announced candidates. So I am out knocking doors every day in my constituency, and I'm talking to voters about the issues that matter. Now, this weekend, most people did come to the door and say that they believe that the Prime Minister is handling the global crisis well at the moment. So I would say if Reform are genuinely going to challenge, let's find out who your candidates are, and let's start the campaign.
We're out of time this morning. I'm going to wait for my knife and fork from Brian Whittle. I won't be eating that hat, by the way, May. I'll give you that prediction. That's it for this week. We'll be back at the same time next week. Until then, from all of us to all of you, please do have a very good week.